Over the past 2 weeks, Damian Lillard played the best basketball he has in his entire NBA career. In 6 games against the Nuggets, Dame averaged 34 points per game, by far a playoff career high, and 10 assists per game, also by far a playoff career high, on 46% shooting from the field and 45% shooting from 3, both by far playoff career highs as well, and 94% free throw shooting, giving him a remarkable true shooting percentage of 66 for the series, just a tick above Steph Curry's mark from this regular season. He dropped a casual double nickel in Game 5, delivered some jaw-dropping clutch moments, and led the Blazers to play as what would be the best offense ever by a country mile with him on the floor. But they lost the series. So today, let's figure out what to make of that, appreciating that in year 9, Dame is better than ever before, while also reconciling that with the fact that the Blazers, for the second consecutive year, couldn't make it out of the first round. When it comes to what makes Dame so special, you have to start with his shooting. And against the Nuggets, Dame shot from beyond the arc at a volume, from a distance, and with a level of accuracy we have never seen before. In this series, Dame made a blazing 5.8 threes per game at a 45% clip, attempting an absurd 13 triples per game. That volume far outpaces everybody else in history, as Dame set the record for postseason attempts per game from 3 and crushed the makes per game record, as nobody else had ever even eclipsed 5. The value of this shooting is multifaceted. It is first off Dame's greatest weapon as a scorer because it's his most efficient weapon. He gets much more bang from his buck shooting 45% on 3s as he does 48% on 2s as he shot in this series, but also because of the absurd pressure it exerts on a defense and the fact that he can get a good shot off whenever because of it. 2 years ago, Dame made 2 major shifts in his game. He started shooting deep threes, like 30-plus footers, with much more regularity than ever before, and he began weaponizing the step-back 3 about as effectively as anybody in the sport, more than doubling his attempts in both areas from the 2018-19 season to 2019-20. His efficiency from both areas also stands out, as over those 2 years, Dame has shot 37% from 30-plus feet and better than 43% on step-back threes. Since these evolutions in his game occurred, Dame has had his 2 highest scoring years ever on by far the best efficiency of his career, an indication these shifts have made him an unequivocally better player, which has never been more apparent than it was in this series. Let's start by looking at the value of the sheer distance from which Dame shoots. In this series, excluding one heave attempt at the end of a game, Dame shot 15 of 30 from 28 plus feet. That's 50% efficiency on high volume attempts that are all more than 4 feet beyond the arc. The threat of a player who will take 5 shots a game from that distance and will make half of them is immeasurable to a defense. It means you can set a screen for Dame a step up from the logo and he'll slither around, pull immediately, and drain it often, and the defense has to be constantly aware of and compensate for that possibility. Just look at this example of how terrifying Dame shooting makes him. The second Norman Powell comes over into his realm, MPJ tries to double Dame from 45 feet out, and it doesn't even do anything. A screen from Norm set almost 35 feet out then gives Dame all the window he needs to slide in and confidently drill a 29-footer. Given this ability to stretch out a defense, Dame feasted in the pick and roll this series, generating more than 40% of his offense there and ranking in the 83rd percentile as far as pick and roll efficiency. Most notably, he presented an utterly nightmarish matchup for Nikola Jokic. Jokic is a respectable defender thanks to his great hands, good instincts, high defensive IQ, and consistent effort, but there is no worse matchup for him than a player who can pull him out 5 feet beyond the arc and then calmly decide whether he wants to pull in his face or turn on the burners and blow by him. Of course, dropping under the screen was absolute suicide, and giving Dame even just a bit of a window proved to be too dangerous, as the man shot an absurd 50% on 11 pull-up threes per game in this series. So, Jokic had to play him pretty airtight, which often led to him and Dame engaging in a straight-up foot race to the bucket in a battle Jokic lost just about every time. If help came, Dame would dump off to a roller for the finish, and if it didn't, he'd take it himself. While Jokic got cooked in the pick and roll, his teammates got cooked just about everywhere. The Nuggets threw a number of their finest soldiers at Dame: rangy Aaron Gordon, feisty Facundo Campazzo, a bit of Austin Rivers, and, on far too many switches, a helpless Michael Porter Jr. Gordon did the best job, but nobody really had an answer for Dame. So given that nobody could check him, often for Dame, the best answer was simply to avoid bringing a second defender over with a screen and just go 1v1. In isolation, Dame was downright unstoppable in this series. With his handle, jump shooting, and quickness, the man averaged 1.65 points per possession out of isolation. That is the best mark of anybody in these playoffs, regardless of volume, and it means that, in theory, if the Blazers just ran Dame isolation for every possession of every game, they'd average 161 points a night. Dame's lethal use of the step back was a huge part of this. Lillard drained 10 of 18 step-back threes in this series, meaning he converted better than 55% of his attempts on a shot no defender can affect. The length of a Gordon or an MPJ hardly matters when Dame is creating 5 feet of separation and able to make the toughest shot in basketball look like a walk in the park. Additionally, all of the difficult shot making that makes Dame so great for 48 minutes, the absurd range from which he pulls, and the lethalness of the step back is a huge reason he is so unstoppable in the clutch. Because along with his general fearlessness, you can't really make the shots he takes harder than they already are in a stretch of the game where tough shot making is by far the #1 priority. You may think, as Paul George famously said, that's a bad shot sometimes, but for Dame, it almost never is. Now, along with his otherworldly scoring in this series, Dame had perhaps his most pronounced playmaking impact ever versus Denver. Lillard averaged over 10 assists per game in this series, the third best mark of anybody in the playoffs, and created over 27 assist points per game, the second highest mark. A lot of this came out of the pick and roll, where, as mentioned earlier, Dame blowing by a defender didn't necessarily result in a shot by him. If help came, he showed consistently impressive awareness of where both the roll man and shooters were at all times, and delivered some big-time, accurate, well-disguised passes to both. Here, you can see the gravity of his shooting ability. By curling around a screen set 30-plus feet out, Dame takes 2 panicked defenders completely out of the play, leaving him with a menu of automatic options as poor Marcus Howard comes over to help. He could throw the lob to Derrick Jones Jr. or kick to a wide-open Melo, and he chooses the former. Some of his easier assists came when he attracted 2 defenders off of a screen and could then simply dump it off to Nurk in the free throw line area, who could glide in for an easy finish. The fact that those assists came so easily doesn't take away from Dame's playmaking prowess, it actually accentuates the point. Because of his transcendent scoring ability and the attention he demands at all times, Dame damn near walked into 10 assists per game. He also made some incredibly aware reads in semi-transition situations or just walking up the court, when, while the entire defense is keyed in on the man himself, he is focused on who's around him. Throughout this whole series, Dame never locked into a score-only mindset, including his Game 5 masterpiece, when he continued creating exceptional looks for his teammates down the stretch, who just couldn't knock them down, and this playmaking growth marks yet another area in which Dame has proven he's better now than ever before. This blend of scoring and playmaking makes Dame a truly special offensive engine. Special enough to have led the Blazers to the league's second-best offense this regular season, and to have become just the second player ever to average 34 points per game on 66% true shooting in a single postseason. But we can't just celebrate this greatness without acknowledging that when a guy can do this and not get out of the first round, things have to change. This current experiment is over in Portland. Again, they just posted the second highest offensive rating ever and lost to a team whose third leading scorer was Monte Morris. And yes, the Nuggets have maybe the best player in the world, and they play hard and as a cohesive unit, and guys made big shots. And trust me, I love Monte Morris. But why was that possible? Because the Blazers also posted the third worst defensive rating ever this regular season, and that number got worse in the playoffs. You cannot exist as a contender with 2 point-of-attack defenders who are downright liabilities in Dame and CJ, and no rim protector who is imposing enough to compensate for their deficiencies. It's time to move on from Nurk. He scores at average efficiency out of the pick and roll, far below average efficiency out of the post, and is a non-floor spacer who is just solid defensively. And the value of his passing is somewhat extraneous when it doesn't make sense to run a bunch of offense through him out of the post because you have Damian Lillard. At this point, you'd be much better served with a more explosive rim running, or ideally, even a floor spacing big who can also protect the rim at a high level, even if their game is more simple than Nurk's. Get Miles Turner here, for example, and this team is a whole lot better. It's also probably time to move on from CJ. The man is an artist and is one of the absolute best difficult shot makers in the league, but he brings so little value by star standards when the ball is in his hands and he isn't scoring, and it's really hard to build your team's entire foundation around 2 players who can't make anybody work for their buckets at the guard spot. If they were to sustain a similar foundation, I think it'd have to be with a guy like Bradley Beal, who has better tools than CJ defensively and can fit easily alongside Dame due to his tremendous versatility as a scorer, including his impressive off-ball value and superior playmaking instincts to CJ. This entire era of Portland basketball has centered around finding the wing talent who could compensate for Dame and CJ's defensive deficiencies and also reliably knock down triples on the other end, and they just haven't done it in 6 years. At some point, you need to find another answer, and maybe that answer includes moving on from GM Neil Olshey too, but I think you have to look at CJ. Nurk is on a very movable $12 million expiring contract, and while CJ is maybe a little heftier at $30 million plus per year through 2024, he played the best basketball of his life this season and definitely still holds appeal on the market. But still, moving him will be the tougher sell of the two. This team also just needs way more quality guys off the bench. You can't have one capable big man and 6 players you trust in the playoffs, and your entire team can't fall apart when Dame takes 8 minutes of rest each game. And for the record, that's exactly what happened in this series. The Blazers outscored the Nuggets by 27 points in the 248 minutes Dame was on the floor, and were outscored by 35 points in the 50 minutes he sat. They were 47 points per 100 better with him on the floor, and remarkably, were actually worse with CJ on the floor than off it, showing how much that number really is about Dame alone. That is completely inexcusable. Dame has had a revolution these past 2 seasons. He's deadlier from deep, confident pulling from deeper, and is a better playmaker than ever before. And what have the Blazers done with it? They've ranked 27th and 29th in defensive rating and taken 2 first-round exits. The thought of losing CJ or Nurk is painful, I'm sure, but you got the explosive third guy in Powell, you got the best 3-and-D wing of the Dame-CJ era in Rocco, and you still weren't close. And I think looking back on Dame's career and knowing that he either stuck around in Portland and was never rewarded, or eventually got tired and left town, would be much more painful. Dame can be the best offensive player on a finals team. At this point, I think that'd be tough to deny, but as he's played his best basketball ever over the past 2 seasons, his team hasn't won a playoff series. With Terry Stotts now out of the picture, the Blazers are at a crossroads. They can pretend that he and he alone was the problem, or they can continue to make radical change as they try to salvage the Dame era. A player's prime is finite, and every year you have a guy like Dame and aren't contending is a year wasted. The Blazers may not have an absurd wealth of assets, but could they swing a deal for Bradley Beal on an expiring contract, or rip Miles Turner from an Indiana team that will also likely be looking to make major changes? I don't know, but with a player this special still wearing their jersey, they have to do something massive. To those of you who have made it this far, thank you so much for watching. As always, I hope you've enjoyed. If you have, you can stick around on our YouTube channel. We do videos like this a bunch. I did one just last week on the Fearless Grizzlies and how they demanded respect this season. And you can also see that we post all of our full podcasts to our YouTube channel here. We're doing a couple of NBA shows a week, obviously, as the playoffs are in the heat of things. But during the NFL season, we touch on that as well. And we also often do sports history-specific content about the NBA and NFL. So when we're not as dialed in on the NBA as we are right now, you can expect some of that as well. You can also catch the podcast on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to your audio content, and I will link that in the description. You can also follow us on Twitter at nerd_sesh and on Instagram at nerdsesh to see some highlights from the podcast, to see some graphics that we post with that, and really just to keep up with what we are doing here at Nerd Sesh. But with that, as always, guys, thanks so much for watching. Hope you've enjoyed.